Mhm. Check it. Okay. Hey, and welcome to another Thursday Live. Yes, once again, we are trying to find our sweet spot as far as when the best time to stream our sessions should be on Thursdays. So today we are trying out this particular time slot to see if it does indeed impact the different parameters that we take into consideration whenever we are experiencing some hitches. And of course, we are already looking to see whether this could be that sweet spot that we are looking at. Today's topic is one that should intrigue every parent. We are going to be talking about whether or not what you are doing on your parenting journey for your children is either helping them, is it rushing them, or could it be getting in the way of normal child development? There are some things that we do as parents with good intentions that would unintentionally get in the way of our children's development or might even seek to rush the development. But in the end, we all want to be helpful, right? That's the place where you want to be. You want to be helpful rather than anything else because that is what your child needs in order to thrive. I'm sure we all want to raise children who do thrive. Great. So, regardless of where you are on your parenting journey, the stage at which your child is on their developmental path, it's important that parents educate themselves about what to expect for every stage of their child's growth and development because good intentions would often backfire when they are not rooted in knowledge. Good intentions would backfire when they are not rooted on knowledge. So it's important that you know exactly, what is it that my child is capable of per stage of their development. That is why, of course, we at the Purpose of Parenting Academy are putting out another course called Understanding Your Child, which aims at equipping parents with the knowledge that they would need to navigate the different stages of their child's growth and development, but not just about development, also understanding different, the things that differentiate one child from another. For example, personality, their special needs, there are other things that will set one child apart from the other child, which does not necessarily mean the child is abnormal. The child is just different, right? And when, as a parent, you understand what are those things that makes your child different from the next, it helps you to take a different stance towards supporting your child to enable them develop properly or attain their full potential instead of unintentionally getting in the way sometimes, right? Now, there are so many things that we do as parents that can actually have a contrary result as opposed to what it is that we are trying to achieve. Think, for example, right, when toddlers get to a stage where they try to do everything by themselves. And even though in the course of the child trying to maybe button up their shirt or feed themselves or even just the basic stuff, right? They don't want you to do anything for them. The child insists on doing it by themselves. And in the course of doing so, they make a big mess, right? It's frustrating for parents when you have a toddler and you know that you can do it better than the child. You want to help with the button, the child says no, and then the child is crying out of frustration. Or you want to feed the child insists on eating by themselves, and in the end, all the food goes on the floor, on the table, on their clothing, making a big mess. What is your instinct in that moment? The typical parent, myself included, you just want to jump in and rescue that child, do it for them because it's going to be less messy. Of course, you can do it better than the child, right? That is the natural instinct that every parent is going to have. But what you should ask yourself in that moment is, if I follow what I feel, right? If I follow what I think I should do in this moment, is it going to help my child, rush my child, or would it just get in the way of their healthy development? That's what we're going to be dissecting throughout today's session. And I look forward to your questions, right? I'm hoping that before the end of this session, you would be able to examine the things that you're doing depending on the stage at which your child or your children are on their journey and assess what it is that you're doing, right? If you find out that you're doing certain stuff that is getting in the way, or maybe you're rushing certain areas, or if you're just helping, then that's good, right? So you're here to just get that reassurance that you should continue doing what you have been doing. Now, every parent would interfere in their child's development in one way or another. Usually it's unintentional. That's why knowledge is crucial, because every parent will have the tendency to get in the way, because we have that natural instinct to want to rescue our children. We have that natural instinct to want to respond to the suffering of our children, to their struggles, right? As a parent, you feel like, let me just do it for the child. Let me help the child, so everything will just be easy for them. That's how you feel. That's what you instinctively are driven to do. But with knowledge, you're going to be able to know when to restrain yourself. That even though you feel that way, you shouldn't give in to what it is that you're feeling, because you know that it will not be in the best interest of your child. But without knowing exactly what you can or shouldn't do, that would either help or hinder your child's growth and development, you will just give in all the time. I know many parents who tell me, oh, I can't help it, I don't like seeing my child struggle, I don't want my child to suffer, so I just try to do everything for them to make life as comfortable for them as possible. A life of comfort will never get your child to the maximum or to the highest point of their potential, because nothing good grows in comfort, right? Your child's potential cannot be fully expressed from the place of comfort. Now, on the other end, we have other parents who find themselves expecting too much too soon. Expecting your child to walk just because their sibling walked at a particular age, and then when your other child gets to that particular age, you start having so much expectations, to the point where you find yourself putting pressure on the child, being very critical. There's so many examples of this particular rushing issue. Sometimes it's just peer pressure, right? Other parents' results pressure you to demand the same from your children. Yes, it's important that parents should have some amount of comparative tendencies, because you want to know if your child is hitting the milestones, which can also be a pointer to you whether whether the child is getting all the support that they need to help them hit those milestones. But sometimes excessive comparison will either drive you to rush your child, to pressure your child unnecessarily. So because A is doing this, you want your child to do the same just because they are maybe at the same age as the other child. Not realizing that. I started this session by saying this. You cannot rush development. You cannot speed it up, right? Children will hit those milestones if they are meant. If they have what they need, they will hit the milestones when they are ready to, when their bodies are ready to, when their brain is ready to. Just like you can't force, a child to, for example, walk. You can't force a child to walk, right? Even if you try to start doing everything, forcing the child to walk by one, usually the child will do so when their body is ready to do so. We can even say the same for potty training. Many children have experienced lots of trauma. This particular potty training issue is a source of diverse kinds of trauma for children, particularly here in our context, right? I can only speak for the area where I'm growing, where the majority of the parents I work with come from. Many children will end up experience diverse kinds of trauma because of potty training. Because every parent has in their head that by age one, some even think that by age one, this child should be able to, say, I want to pee, go to the toilet and use the potty, not do it on the floor, not do it on their body. And what happens? When the child does not meet that expectation, maybe you succeeded that way with your first, the parent gets frustrated and now appears as though the child is just being lazy, this child is just wicked, the child just wants to suffer me, give me work, and all of those kinds of things. And you realize that at the root of that, the parents who have a tendency to rush certain aspects of development is are inappropriate expectations, where the parent is expecting something that the child cannot give. So some expect too much too soon, others will help too much that they block independence. But both of these things are common errors, right? You want to be helping, neither rushing nor blocking. What you want to be doing is helping your child, providing the support that they need to develop at their pace. There is such a thing as development at the child's pace, right? You give everything that is needed, right? You make every requirement available for the child, and then you give room for the child to develop at their pace. I'm sure there are some of us adults who have stories of certain things that maybe your parents, maybe traumatized you about. They used to try to rush you, put you pressure. And no matter how much pressure they put, when you got to a certain point, it just came by itself without any pressure, without anyone, sometimes they even force, and they just let you be. And the moment they let you be, it finally happens. So there are several stories like that, right? Let's talk about even potty training. I had parents tell me, "Oh, I've done everything possible. I just left the child," and then suddenly, after some time, the child just began to do these things by themselves. It just began to come naturally because we must be able to ask yourself, right? Is my child ready? You must always check the readiness factor. When it comes to starting school, sometimes parents just, would send a child to school just based on the fact that everybody goes to school at a particular age. There is a readiness factor that you have to look at that can actually be a gauge to tell you whether or not your child is ready. One of the things I advocate for, that I teach parents fiercely, is the fact that potty training is not an age related matter. It's not something that is tied to a particular age. Not every child will be potty trained by age 2. Know that and know peace. All right. And also give your child peace. Some children need more time. So that's why you have to be very, very vigilant for the signs. Development will always give you signals. We're going to look at that as we go ahead. Development always gives signals. Take a child who is trying to start, learning to walk, who is about to begin walking. They will give you signals. Right? Usually you see the child maybe trying to support themselves to stand. They'll probably try to take a few steps and fall. They will show you the signals that this body is ready to start practicing, to start entering this new phase. So development will always give signals. But the problem is many times parents are not able to identify these signals, talk less of being able to, give the support required at that point to help the child just flourish from then on. So remember that one of the things that can actually cause parents to hinder or cause you to hinder your child's development will be the fact that you want to save time, right? Especially for the younger ones. Because supporting a child who is at those tender years to just grow, and develop naturally or at their pace, it's time consuming. So patience is indispensable. When it comes to helping a child or being helpful in terms of your child's natural development, patience is indispensable. But one thing that many parents must realize about patience is the fact that, patience doesn't just mean folding your arms and watching, right? It's just like a farmer. You don't plant your seed and say, okay, I've put my seed in the soil, now I'll just be patient. But in being patient, it also means being active, taking the right step, doing the right things, to help nurture your seed into the plant that it can become, right? To express the potential that it carries. The same thing for your child. So while being patient with your child to develop at their pace, you also need to be doing the right things that entails the support that the child will need to help them flourish when they get to that point where they're ready to hit those milestones. Now, teenagers also give signals. Development happens at different stages of child development. Your child will go from one stage to another, and they're going to give signals when they're transitioning, when they're going from one stage or one phase to another, when they're about to acquire new skills and all of that. When they've acquired the skills, there will always be signals. One thing I talked about in the write-up when I was talking about this particular session is the fact that teenagers give signals as well. And I gave the typical example of the fact that most teenagers, when they get to that teenage stage, they begin to act as though they know everything, right? As though you can't teach them nothing. They already know. You want to say this, they already know. So the child has this know-it-all attitude, which for some parents can be a turn-off. So the parent either, because of that, starts having adult expectations of their teenager, or just completely shuts down support because the child, okay, you know everything fine, and just stops teaching or stops supporting. So either way still gets in the way of what they need to help them get to where they need to be. So remember that there are different stages of child development, beginning from the toddler years, the early childhood, let's just say early childhood, right, which goes from, let's say, 0 to 6 years. We'll divide it into 3 stages. We'll talk about early childhood, we'll talk about the middle childhood, and then, of course, the teenage or adolescent years, where our kids enter the teenage stage, where they have puberty and all of that. But remember that this topic is so important today because parenting is not just about loving on your child, right? Because Like I said, the parent that ends up getting in the way of their child's growth and development is doing so from a place of good intentions. It's never coming from a place of, wanting to damage the child or wanting to hinder the child. That's not the intent of the parent. But usually, many parents, in loving on their kids, right, they tend what we commonly call petting. In petting or loving on their kids, they end up doing things that gets in the way. So when we talk about being helpful in terms of supporting your child with their development, it has to do with timing. It has to do with your awareness. What do you know about what the child needs? It also has to do with balance. You have to be able to support, to find a balance between giving support and giving room, right? There's a time to give support and there's a time to step back. Allow your child to struggle appropriately to be able to have that breakthrough that you're hoping that they do get, right? So helping a child with development or helping a child develop naturally it's not just about folding your arms and watching. Yes, sometimes that's what it entails, but usually it's about knowing what kind of support is needed, what your child needs to thrive at that stage, but also about knowing when to step aside so your child can struggle their way to the next stage. So at different stages, the things we do as parents will either empower our children to develop properly or hold it back. So I want you to bear that in mind. But the truth is, most of us parents do all three. There is no parent who has never found themselves at one point. Every parent has had to rush at some point, every parent has had to hinder at some point, and every parent, of course, would have had to help at some point. So, what matters is how much of each of these things are you doing, right? One of the things that helps you to be in the helpful point or helpful place mostly is knowledge. When you know exactly what to do, how to support your child, what your child needs per stage, what behavior is normal, it helps you to know exactly where to position yourself as well to be supportive to the child. So let's start with early childhood. What are some of the things that you can think of, right? Maybe you listening to this now. What comes to mind when you hear me talk about rushing development? Is there something that you found your child, you were trying to rush your child into, or trying to a certain result you were trying to rush your child to attain, that you realize that when you step back, it actually happened on its own at its own time, right? So many parents experience this around potty training, around walking, maybe even talking. So it happens to different parents in different ways. So if you find yourself rushing a certain part of your child's development, what was your experience with that? And what did you notice when you maybe stepped back or rather became supportive instead of pressuring the child? Some kids, once you step back, that's when they actually blossom in that area where you've been struggling and pressuring them. So every child needs to have room to develop at their pace. So what happens in early childhood? That's from 0 to 6 years. There's some common tendencies that parents have at this stage. One of the things that you have to know at this stage is the fact that children learn mostly through play, which means that children need room to move around, to play around, to jump around, and just to be kids, right? To enjoy their childhood. That already gives you a clue about how many parents get in the way of development at this stage. Usually, it's by restricting movement, restrict lots of restrictions on playfulness. Yes, you want to apply discipline, you want structure, but if the things you're doing hinders the child completely from their playfulness, then you are getting in the way of their development. A typical example, of course, would be the toddler and the screen. One of the primary reasons that parents share with me about, why they ended up giving their child too much screen time is because they were trying to keep the child calm, keep the child on one spot. Meanwhile, at that stage, the child's tendency to move around a lot, to touch things a lot, to do, everything and anything is because their brain needs that stimulation, right? So the thing you're seeing, the behavior you're witnessing, that is an inconvenience to you at that stage of your child's growth is actually the signal. That is the signal. That's the developmental signal at that stage. Usually around between age 1 and 2. That's when kids start moving around and doing a lot of things. All right. That is a signal. That unrestful nature that most toddlers have is actually a signal from their brain to move around. They need the space, they need the exploration, they need the stimulation to enable the brain to develop properly. Now, that's exactly why when parents get in the way of that tendency for them to move around at that stage by using the screen or just restricting them completely, you realize that the child's development is hindered in certain ways. We see a lot of children today who are speech delayed, who have focus issues, who are antisocial. Why? because the brain did not get what it needed. Instead of the child being allowed to explore, to have a variety of things to play with and different kinds of play, the child was restricted to the same spot, and their mind was not triggered or stimulated enough to enable them, it advance the way it should have advanced. So if there is a kind of delay when that is when that happens. So you're getting in the way. The parent gets in the way unintentionally. So in the course of trying to do something that you think is convenient, mostly for you, the parent, right? It's hard to be with a toddler. The toddler years can be very tricky because your child will want to be everywhere. You need to be alert. You cannot lose focus for a moment, because the moment you lose focus, you know it, right? That door you forgot open, the moment you forget to, be on your alert, what happens? The toddler rushes there as quickly as they can, because they know that if they don't do that quickly, you're going to shut that door, right? And it's tiring to build a toddler, who's at that stage. But remember, that's why I said knowledge is key. Because when you understand that this child's mobility, this child's desire to want to go everywhere, touch everything, make a mess, and all of that is a signal. That is what their development requires at that stage. They need you to make their environment safe. That's the support you give them. That's how you support them at that stage. A safe environment, not one that restricts exploration, but one that encourages exploration while ensuring that the child is safe. That's how you support your child in the early childhood years. So you help by providing safe exploration, by responding to their curiosity, and also encouraging play, investing in their playtime. Your middle age, your early child, your child in early childhood needs to have access to diverse kinds of play. That is how you support them. Now, how do we often rush them? By expecting them to hit certain milestones at particular point in time. Sometimes it's just a particular number. When my child is 2, they should be able to walk, they should be able to talk, they should be able to be potty trained. So parents have their list. The list is not written somewhere. It's just in their head, based on what they've seen from other kids, based on what maybe they've experienced with siblings of the same child. So they just have those expectations already registered on their mind. And when that child gets to that point and they start trying to provide training for those things that they're expecting, and it's not taking on, frustration sets in, and they also frustrate the child in the process, because it's like, why can't you deliver? Why can't you meet my expectations? It's important to stop and ask yourself, whenever you're trying something over and over and over, and it doesn't seem to be working, particularly when it comes to development and your child acquiring new skills, ask yourself if you're expecting too much too soon. And that might just be related to that particular child. There are kids who actually walk for the first time at 18 months, right? Yeah, the majority of kids usually will start walking by age 1, but there are a few kids who need a little more time. Not everybody stands up and walks at age 1. Some kids stand up and walk at 8 months, 9 months, right? I've heard some really, really interesting numbers. I've heard of kids who walked at 8 months. Some walked at 9 months. I don't think any of mine walked before 1 year. Most of them, I think all of them walked from 1 year and above. But that doesn't make them abnormal. So just because your child doesn't hit the milestone exactly at the point that other children hit the milestone does not mean that they are abnormal necessarily, especially when you've done the medical checks and they say everything is fine. Then you just have to provide the support the child needs and then apply patience. So patience is crucial. Now, one of the things we can also do, some of the common things that parents do to hinder development for the children in early childhood, is by completely restricting natural discovery. All right, and not just by forcing them to stay on one spot, but also just the environment, the constant yelling, the fear, the beatings. Sometimes even the child continuously hurting them. So that's why I said the biggest support you give to children in early childhood is making their environment safe for exploration. Because sometimes it might not be that you're the one stopping your child from exploring, but when a child consistently gets injured in an environment, their brain eventually learns that, yes, we need to be stimulated, but this environment is not safe. So let's cut down our explorative tendency. So the child begins to become less curious, less explorative, not because you stop them, but because the environment has taught them so many lessons that is keeping them from wanting or from pursuing that instinct to explore. So make the environment safe. That is the biggest help you can give to your child in early childhood. Now, another thing I want us to talk about at this stage is um, being sensitive to the cues, to the signals that your child age 0 to 6 years would send to you. Now, it's very typical for parents to want to do everything for the child, right? In your mind, it's still your baby, so you want to bathe them, you want to brush their teeth for them. Some parents even carry on feeding the child to when they are 3, 4, because you say, oh, if I give you to eat, you'll not eat well. If I allow you to bathe, you'll not bathe well. Yeah, it's true that the child will not be able to do those things the way you do them. But one of the things that parents must bear in mind with kids in this early stage is the fact that you must make room for independence, following your child's signals. When a child starts insisting on feeding themselves, let them, right? Put on the clothes that you know they can make a mess without you getting all worked up about. Put them on a space. I've seen parents put their kids on the floor with their plate to eat because they know, okay, if they make a mess there, it's fine. You're not going to mess maybe the tablecloth or something. So put your child in a situation that can actually encourage them to explore their independence, and then you provide support. All right. One of the things I did for my kids when they were toddlers, particularly when they get to the stage where they're trying to dress up by themselves. I think allowing a toddler to dress up themselves one of the most frustrating things, right? It's very frustrating because usually they will not be able to do much of it, but they will lots of crying. When they try to do the button and they're not able to get it into the hole, they throw a tantrum. Sometimes the child can be there for like 30 minutes. And you can also see how resilient children start off their journey being. Most kids are naturally, you have a kind of natural resilience. You see the child frustrated, but continues to go back and try. The child will cry, have a tantrum, go back and try. But somehow, because most parents can't tolerate their own irritation or their own emotions around a frustrated child, they will just step in and override the process. But the thing is, most times, just giving the child little support, particularly in those early stages when they're still trying to figure out the skill, is all that the child needs. Don't take over. Just give a little bit of support. It helps the child to know that, hey, I struggled and I was able to push through and I did it for myself. And the child knows that I did that. I put my button in. I took up my zip, even though I struggled, but I did it. The next time the child tries, it gets better. And after the skill is perfected. So it's very important that we make room for them to explore their independence within, safe boundaries. Ensure that the child stays safe. Don't allow your 2-year-old to carry a bucket of hot water, for example. All right. Yeah, they may want to be independent with that, but that is not safe. So you need to weigh the risks. In what areas can I allow my child to explore their independence? With food, of course, that's safe. So you let your child, explore practicing how to feed themselves, let your child practice how to dress themselves, let them be involved in bathing themselves. So giving support means not taking over the things your child is confident that they can do for themselves, but ensuring that support is available when and if they need it. So usually I'll tell my child, when you need help, just let me know. I'm going to help you. Right? And let the child try. The child will try 1, 2, 3, fail, cry, have tantrums. But then eventually, sometimes the child will say, Mama, please, can you help me? It's important that you let them know that support is available, but also give room for them to go through their struggle, because it is that struggle that actually teaches them the biggest skills, that actually develops their skills more. So don't be afraid to allow your child to struggle. All right? Don't be afraid to allow your child to struggle. Let them struggle, because in the struggle, that's where the greatest benefits are. But also ensure that the struggle is age appropriate. I always use the example. I know it's very graphic, but you will not let a 2-year-old carry a gas bottle, no matter how much they cry. You wouldn't let them carry a gas bottle because you know that it is beyond them. A 2-year-old should not be able to carry a gas bottle. So yes, they are crying for it, but they can't do it. So there's a difference between what a child can struggle their way through and do it, and what a child absolutely cannot do that could actually end up hurting the child. You need to be able to make a difference between those two things. Great. So at this stage, your child is learning through play, and helping them means giving space and tools for exploration, right? Not pushing them to reach milestones prematurely. There is no competition anywhere. There is no race anywhere. As a parent, you're not competing with anyone to get your child to hit a particular milestone. I don't know who is counting, who is keeping scores. Sometimes stand and ask yourself, All right. Why am I pressuring my child to use the potty at age 2 when it's clear that they're not ready to do so? There's no competition anyway. Nobody's giving out medals for the first child to walk or the first person whose child uses the potty. Sometimes we pressure children for our own selfish aims. That's kind of harsh, but that's the truth. Sometimes we do it for our own selfish aim, just to be able to say, "Oh, my child was able to read, my child was able to do this by this age." We do it for the bragging rights. So sometimes check yourself. Ask yourself, am I rushing this child to do this? Am I doing it for bragging rights or because this is really what the child needs at this stage? Yes, many parents will use their children for bragging rights. You want to be able to brag that your child was able to do this and do that. And in the process, you can actually end up traumatizing your child. So please, let's be sensitive to the signals that our kids are giving out regarding their readiness when it comes to how they are developing. Now, the second thing you're going to look at is the middle childhood. Kids who are between, the kids in between the primary school years, the preteens and late primary school kids. I think kids from about class 3 or so. So from 7 to 12, these are kids who are in middle childhood. Now, before I even go into this, let me hear from you, right? If you are probably raising a toddler, or maybe you can remember from when you were raising, when your children were toddlers, what was the area where you found yourself rushing them a lot? Was it potty training? Was it getting them to be able to dress themselves, or were you constantly taking over those tasks? Is there a particular area that you realized you either was rushing the child or you hindered the child's development in one way or another while your child was in the early childhood stage? I'd like to hear from you in the comments. Now, the middle childhood stage is also another critical stage because this is a stage where kids need to have more room to explore independence. All right, these are kids who should be able to do a whole lot for themselves. But one thing you realize is that for most of our kids of today, you see kids who are still age 7 or who are even I've met kids who are age 9 who still don't know maybe how to find their way home, who don't know maybe their parents, who can't wash their socks or their undies, they can't do some of these basic tasks. So it makes us ask the question, right? How is it that a child of a particular age who is supposed to be able to have certain skills that helps them give basic care to themselves, why are these skills not setting in? Why is it that you have a child who is 9 who is still not able to give themselves a proper bath? Right? Now, this helps us realize how we might be getting in the way of the child's development, of the child's progress on their developmental path. So, hindering, one of the biggest things that parents do at this stage, the middle childhood years, is doing everything for their children or having someone do everything for their children. Again, this would usually fall back to the parent's mindset. Many parents who find themselves overindulging their kids or providing excessive help is usually because they have the mindset or maybe their own childhood experiences where they had resolved in themselves not to allow their child to suffer. So to them, allowing the child to do basic tasks is stressful, is suffering for the child. I can afford it. Why should I allow my child to struggle and do work when I can pay somebody to do it? So it's all about the parent's mindset, what the parent is looking at those basic tasks to be. If you're looking at it as punishment, you're looking at it as hard work, and instead of training ground for your child, you would have the tendency to do a lot more than you should be doing for your middle-aged child. You have no business, for example, washing your child's lunchbox at this stage of their growth and development after school, or having someone else watch that. So there are some basic things that kids should be able to do for themselves, which many parents find themselves doing for the child. And by doing that, you're getting in the way because it is in doing those things for themselves, it's in exploring those avenues, right, of self-care, of caring for the environment, that children in this age group learn the most skills, develop personality, develop character, and also build their resilience. And the thing is, when you overhelp your child at this stage, you are setting yourself up for frustration later. Because guess what? The same parent who overhelps their child at this stage of their growth and development will get to the teenage years and suddenly, because of the child's size, start expecting the child to be able to do more. So you see, it's contradictory because you are the one who hindered the child from progressing on their path of development by doing everything for the child. And then when the child progresses now to the teenage years, because their body is bigger, you start expecting the child to just be able to know, right? How come big you cannot do this, big you cannot do that? The question is, did you prepare the child in the previous stage for the current stage? That's the question. So, helping, rushing, hindering. How do we do these three things for a child in the middle childhood years? So, I said hindering, one of the first things we do, most common, is doing everything for the child, or which prevents the child from learning resilience, which prevents the child from learning how to tolerate struggle. One of the key things you need to have on your agenda at this stage is teaching your child to tolerate discomfort, to be tolerant of struggle, to be able to struggle without giving up the goal. That's a big part of helping your child develop resilience. Now, how do we rush? We rush by demanding adult level responsibility. Sometimes there are some things that parents will demand of their children that is just completely beyond. So when a child gets to the stage where they're able to eat independently, they're able to go to the bathroom independently, they're able to do their homework independently, sometimes as parents, right, it might trick you into expecting the child to now be able to reason as an adult, right? Let's talk about reasoning. Expecting your child to be able to reason with adult capacity. That's why you hear things like big you like that. How can you be making this kind of mistake? How can you break this thing? How can you be so careless? Things that come out of the parent's mouth will betray what it is that they're expecting from the child. I'm expecting my child to think like an adult, to remember like an adult, to be able to strategize and plan like an adult. So if you don't know what kids of this age group are capable of, you will fall into this trap because your child is now able to do a lot for themselves. And in your mind, that might also cause you to graduate them at the level of their thinking capacity. Graduate them from childhood to adult level. You start expecting your child to make decisions like an adult. I expect you, how can you be so foolish? How can you have been able to do this? You start expecting the child to reason like a full-grown adult. And that is unfair. All right. But it comes from a place where the parent is looking at what the child can do for themselves and then expecting the child to then just be able to think like an adult, which of course is not going to happen. It will frustrate you, it will frustrate the child. Now, how do we rush them? We rush them by demanding adult level responsibility. Yes, that's one. But also things like academic perfection, right? Or being able to, let's say, for example, usually reading. Most kids will be able to read by the time they turn age 6. For some children, it happens earlier. For some kids, it happens on schedule. I remember my first, when he got to age 6, I did nothing special. His reading just came. I can't explain it, but his reading just came. I've heard somebody share a story like this before, and it didn't make sense to me until I had my own kids, right? My first child just woke up one morning and was able to read a book, like a book that is regarded to be an adult book. Yes, of course, they've been doing some basic stuff at school, and I've been trying to teach, every now and then. But I promise you, there was a morning he just woke up. We're having morning devotion, and he was able to pick up a book and said, "I want to read." I was like, "You can read?" He said, "Yes." And he just went ahead and read, except for those, very complex words. But I was like, "What happened between the last time we read? These are things you could not read." He said he doesn't understand. He just could understand how to read it. So I think that's the only case I've had for a child who just spontaneously began to do something. But for other kids, it varies. I've met kids who struggled to read at age 6, but by the time they got to age 8, they were able to read fluently and were able to catch up with their peers. So it doesn't happen on schedule for every child. Some children will hit these milestones before their peers. Some will do it according to, on time for most kids, while some will do it later, right? All of these 3 kids, the one who starts early, the one who starts on time, the one who starts a little later, they are all normal. They're just growing at different paces. So they're just growing at different paces. So sometimes, let's take for example the child who starts school early. You realize that many kids who start school early, one thing I've noticed as well, is that many of these kids who start school early, they usually come under enormous pressure. Let's take for a child who starts school let's say before they even turn two, around age two, but their peers started school at age three. What many parents don't realize is that, yes, both kids might be, they might appear to have the same size, they might appear to be able to, do similar stuff, but there will be differences in terms of the developmental milestones for those two children. The one who started early, too early, and the one who started on time, right? Because the brain is the thing that is in, that should be in focus here. Now, the child starts at age two might be intelligent, right? Might be smart, might be able to learn quickly, but on the at the level of emotional development, where are they? That's why you see the child will get to class six or class five, and where a certain level of emotional maturity is expected, the child is still lagging behind because you cannot speed up development. Just because you've taken your child and put them a class ahead, you cannot also carry their development and shift it forward. Or it will happen on schedule. It will happen at its time. You cannot rush it. Those are typical examples because I've had lots of children whose parents reached out to me with difficulties they were having in terms of academics, and then we discovered that this is because the child is usually the parent comes to me and say, "Okay, my child is in class two or in class four, but is not able to do what these other kids are doing, or is still struggling with this." I've had kids come in, the child is in class one, but the child is still wearing a diaper. I'm like, how is that possible? By the time you want to research, you find out that this child, is in this class, but their age is not the same as the majority of their peers. So they were rushed into that particular level. And that will also have consequences when it comes to certain developmental milestones that are required for that level. The child might be lacking in those things, even though they have the intelligence or they are able to learn quickly, like those of that level. They'll still be lagging behind in certain areas. So now, how do we help children who are in the middle childhood level? Supporting their independence has to do with involving them, right? Involving them in housework, involving them in problem solving stuff, involving them in teamwork related, stuff around the house. That's one of the key ways you can do, the key things you can support kids in the middle childhood years. Now, if you're a parent who has a tendency to overhelp, to do everything for the child, you are getting in the way of your child's development. All right, you're getting in the way because what these children need is for you to just help them be able to pick up the skills they need, learn to be responsible, learn to clean up for themselves, pick up these skills while they're doing this housework or this little task here and there. So this is the stage where you have to build confidence for your child. And confidence comes from competence. All right. Competence builds confidence. All right. Take note of that. Competence builds confidence. The more competent your child becomes at doing certain things, maybe basic things around the house, caring for themselves, executing a chore, the more confident they become. Think about it. When you are walking into an exam hall where you know you have studied well, you've studied the things you know are surely going to come. You walk into the exam hall, others are cowering and you're confident. Why? Because you know that you're competent. So competence builds confidence. The skillful person at the workplace will walk with their head high because they know that I know my job, I know what to do. So you don't bow your head low when you know that you know what you're doing. So the more competent your child becomes at different tasks, at taking care of themselves, at doing different things around the house, the more their confidence grows. And this confidence will be crucial when they get to the next stage of their growth, which is the teenage years. So helping your child in the middle childhood years means guiding them. So you have to take on a guidance role where you are showing your child how to do different things without taking over and doing it for them. You have to be more of a guide than a person doing everything for your child. So let mistakes become lessons. You have to allow them to make mistakes. Failures and mistakes are a big part. The reason why many parents will want to do everything for their kids is because they do it more perfectly. Think about it, right? You would wash the socks better than your child can wash them. You would wash the plate better than your child can wash them. You would bathe them better than they can bathe themselves. But the question is, when you do it for them, who does it benefit? It benefits you, it benefits your ego, it benefits your self-esteem. But does it benefit the child the same? Answer is no. So doing it for them can make your child, happy with the ease, but in the long run, the benefit does not go to them because they will never learn to do it for themselves by watching you do it for them. All right. The only benefit they get is when you let them go through the struggle and do certain things for themselves. Now, I'm going to also put this in here. Sometimes parents over expect from kids in the middle childhood years. I'm talking even in terms of chores. One of the reasons why some kids might begin to put up difficult attitudes when it comes to chores might also be because the parent has overburdened them. So there is such a thing as overburdening a child when it comes to chores. Sometimes the chores are just completely a gross exaggeration, with respect to the age at which the child is and what the child should be able to do at that time. Some parents over indulge their kids when it comes to, the kind of work you're allowing the child to do. And sometimes the work takes over the child's childhood completely. Let's take, for example, firstborns, right? Many parents will have their firstborn be the assistant parent for the rest of the kids. And this robs them of just being a child because while others are playing, they're going to have to be watching their junior ones. Now, is this something that is bad altogether? No. It's only a problem when you're having your child do those things so that you can free up time to do other things for yourself while that child is not able to play like kids of their age or to also have time for leisure, to also have time to explore other things just because they are tied to constantly parent their younger ones. So yes, you want your child to be responsible. You don't want it to come at the expense of their childhood. Okay, you don't want it to come at the expense of their childhood. So build your child's confidence by helping them become more competent. The more your child can do for themselves at this stage, the more confident they will become. Of course, finally, we're going to talk about adolescents, the teenagers, age 13 to 18, the I know it all people, right? This At this stage, children will tend to develop an I know it all attitude where tell them something, say, Mama, I already know, Mama, I know how to. They don't want you to, they want to show you that they are capable, right? We must understand what is behind that behavior. Many kids at this stage are doing this because they are trying to show you that they can be independent. They're trying to show you that they have grown, which indeed they have, right? But again, this particular stage would often cause parents to go in one of two directions, right? One direction would be where the parent is just completely just say, okay, since you say I'll not show you. So the parent is just completely withdrawing all support altogether just because, yeah. So yes, the attitude is telling you, I don't need you, I can do it by myself. But mind you, this is a child who is still developing, who still needs support. So yeah, even though they might do that, be the parents in that moment, right? And still find a way to give support that the child needs. Sometimes it might just be encouragement. Sometimes it might just be, helping the child a little bit here and there without taking over. So it's important that you understand that even though they have this standoffish attitude, it doesn't mean that they truly do know it all. They still need your guidance. They still need your help. Now, the second thing that parents often, would tend to do for their teenager at this stage would be to still insist on doing everything for the child. Now, some parents still carry that behavior into the teenage years where they still insist to do everything for the teenager. You have kids who are age 16, but none of them can be able to take up the list, and go to the market and pick up the things that are needed for foodstuff. That's a problem. You have kids who are age 16 and still you're struggling with tasks around the house that your children should be able to help you up or give you assistance with. That is still a problem. So some parents will continue at this stage to still be excessively helpful, always trying to do everything for the child, and that is going to have devastating consequences. If at this stage you're still trying to do everything for your teenager, you're going to successfully raise an irresponsible child. You'll raise your child to become an irresponsible adult, because responsibility comes from assigning responsibility, not from taking it away. So the more you do for your child, the more you rob them of the opportunity to become more responsible. So how do we hinder? One of the ways that parents will hinder at this stage is by dismissing feelings. Your child is going to enter another stage where it will be as though they are almost, they are back to being a toddler, except they are bigger in their bodies, right? Because kids go through this stage and there's a lot going on for your teenager. So one of the things that parents will do at this stage to hinder the child's natural development is by dismissing feelings or not being able to respond to the child's feelings appropriately. Another thing that parents will do, and this might even shock some people, is controlling friendships. And I'm sure you're thinking, oh, but if I don't control this, my child is going to befriend bad people, bad friends, and it can mislead the child. I get you, right? Of course, that is something that any and every parent will be concerned about. You don't want your child, mingling with the wrong crowd. So you spend your time picking their friends for them, saying don't go near this one and all of that. But that is not counterproductive because you will not always be there when your child grows up to be an adult to pick who they are going to relate with. That's why instead of taking that particular stance where you're trying to pick friends for your child, which hinders their development by the way, you want to instead adopt a position where you are training your child how to make the right friends and also picking the environment from which they are picking these friends. And you're like, how do I get to pick the environment where my child picks their friends? Oh, yes, that is the parents' job, all right? Parents decide the environment in which their children get to grow up. Parents decide the school where their child is going to, where their child is going to get their education. And by picking these things, the environment where your child is growing up in, the school your child attends, where they're spending most of their time, also ends up shaping your child in more ways than you realize. So it's not just instead of focusing on just picking their friends, which will end up pushing your teenager towards hiding their friends from you. Because again, the parent is always trying to say, befriend this, don't befriend that one. You don't pick friends for your child directly. You do so indirectly by picking the environment from which they're selecting the friends and also by training them, teaching them how to keep a friendship, how to maintain a friendship. Those are the things that you teach your child instead of focusing on just, canceling their friendships that don't seem to agree with you. So, how do we rush teenagers? Of course, that's going to be by expecting them to think like adults. Your teenager is bigger. They might be as tall as this room, but so long as they are still 16, they are not 25, their brain is still developing. That means that there will be gaps, there will be lapses in judgment, there will be gaps in decision making. Your child will still do a lot of foolish things. Not because they are foolish, but because their brain that is responsible for all of those things is still developing. So expecting them to have it all figured out, even though your child acts as though they know everything, if you actually go ahead to have that expectation for them to just know and do everything, you're going to end up very frustrated as a parent, but also frustrating your child at the same time because they might be big in their bodies, but it does not mean that their brain has grown beyond its years. A 16-year-old child has a 16-year-old brain. And that is a brain that still lacks a couple of years before it completes the development cycle for the brain. So you cannot expect such a child to give you adult level decision making or adult level reasoning. So there are adults today who are in their 40s that still have lots of lapses in judgment and decision making. And this will also go back to look at how were they trained, right? So the training you're giving your child is what will help them to be able to navigate the world eventually on their own. Because whether you like it or not, you're going to have to release your child from your nest. You're going to have to release them into the world. All right. Now, another thing that parents rush for teenagers is their identity. Their identity. Some parents rush their teenager too soon to become conclusive about who they want to become, all those career things we ask children. What do you want to become when you grow up? What do you want to, you're trying to see who is this child becoming? Well, the truth is your child does not even have all the answers yet. They see a lot your child does not know. They see a lot your child is trying to explore. So, excuse me, please. Identity is also another area where parents rush. They want too much too soon. They want to see, mature behavior too soon. They want to see things that are at the adult level already manifesting in the teenager, and that is just not possible. So when you do that, you end up traumatizing your child in the process. You want your child to make choices or, make complex decisions as an adult would, even though they are still just a child. So knowing these things helps you adjust your expectations. You realize that you become more patient with your children. When you know what your child needs per stage and you're able to make that available, right? It is a very heartwarming feeling. It's very heartwarming. So teenagers need trust and dialogue. They need those two things. Those are their needs. To help them develop normally, your teenager will need two things from you. They'll need trust from you. They'll need you to give them some amount of trust and allow them to fail and then learn from it. Right? Allow them to fail and then learn from it. So they need it. They need the failures. They need the mistakes. They need the room to fail. Give them the room to make mistakes without being overly critical and harsh because they are learning through that. So helping your teenager will mean being a steadily present parent, even though they act as though they do not need you. They do need you at this stage very, very much. So teenagers need parental presence really, really well. They need it because your child is navigating lots of stuff. They need that support. They need that parental insight. They need that parental um, um, presence to be able to help them navigate the different challenges they're going to encounter as they journey through the teenage years. Okay, so these are the three stages I had to share with you today for you to ask yourself: Am I helping? Am I rushing? Or am I hindering my child's development? Which one of these three things have you been able to relate with? Helping, rushing, hindering. Have you been able to identify how it is that you might be doing some of these things for your child? Are you rushing your child? Are you rushing for your child to attain a particular milestone? I've had my own experiences with rushing as well. And sometimes it's really just because you want to be able to say my child did this at this age, or sometimes because you're just tired of, you know, having to give support until your child is able to do it for themselves. So it's very important that we learn about what children can do, what they are able to do per stage of their growth and development. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I've come to the end of today's session. I hope that you found it helpful. I hope that you from today's session are going to be able to go back and review some of the things that you've been doing with your kids to find out whether you're being supportive or you are taking away or getting in the way of their development. Mind you, we have a course coming up in about a couple of days. It's called Understanding Your Child. And the purpose of this course is to enlighten parents on not just the different things to expect at the different developmental stages, but also temperament, right? Just those things that make children